There was a time when Dottie West couldn't pay her bills, couldn't keep her house, and wasn't sure who in Nashville was still in her corner. Kenny Rogers knew, and he never made her ask twice. By the late 1980s, Dottie West had been one of Nashville's most celebrated voices for more than 2 decades. She had the Grammy, she had the hits, she had the Opry. She had recorded some of the most recognizable duets in country music, with Kenny Rogers, Every Time Two Fools Collide, Anyone Who Isn't Me Tonight, recordings that had put both of their names in living rooms across America. For years, she and Kenny had been one of the most commercially successful partnerships in the genre, 2 artists whose voices complemented each other with the kind of natural ease that couldn't be manufactured and couldn't be replicated once it was gone. But by the late 1980s, the hits had slowed. The industry had moved on in the way that the industry always moves on. Not with cruelty, exactly, but with the particular indifference of a business that responds to what is selling now rather than what was selling then. Dottie's records were no longer charting the way they once had. The crossover moment had passed. The duet era with Kenny had run its course. And underneath the professional difficulties, there was something more concrete and more painful: financial ruin. The specifics of Dottie West's financial collapse in this period are not a secret. They became public in the way that financial disasters in the entertainment business sometimes do, through court filings and bankruptcy proceedings, and the particular kind of visible humiliation that follows when a person who once represented success is publicly reduced to its absence. She lost her home. She owed money in multiple directions. The infrastructure of a career that had once supported a considerable lifestyle had contracted, and the contraction had been severe enough to leave her genuinely vulnerable in ways that she had never expected to face. She continued performing. She was still on the Grand Ole Opry circuit, still bringing to a stage the voice and the presence that had made her one of Nashville's most celebrated performers. The Opry had been part of her life for decades, and even as the commercial landscape had shifted, the stage was a place where the accumulated meaning of a long career could still be felt. She performed there in the summer of 1991 with the particular combination of professional commitment and personal resilience that had always characterized her approach to the work. On the first day of August 1991, on her way to the Grand Ole Opry for a performance, Dottie West was in a car accident on the approach to the venue. The injuries were severe. She was taken to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where she spent 4 days before dying on August 4th, 1991. She was 58 years old. The music world's response to her death was immediate, warm, and widely covered. The tributes came from across the industry, from people who had known her, worked with her, loved her music. Kenny Rogers was among those who spoke publicly about what she had meant. But what he said publicly was necessarily incomplete, because the most important things between them had never been public. What he said privately, to the people who had known them both, was simpler and more direct. He said that Dottie West was one of the most genuinely talented people he had ever stood next to on a stage, and that her circumstances in her final years had not been a reflection of her worth, that the industry's assessment of a person's commercial value in any given moment was a poor and unreliable measure of what they had actually contributed, and that Dottie's contribution was one that the music didn't exist without. In Nashville, word travels. In a music industry as communal as country music was in this era, the knowledge of who was struggling and who was not a carefully guarded secret. People knew about Dottie's situation. Many of them knew and said little, not from cruelty, but from the particular discomfort that surrounds visible financial distress, the social awkwardness of proximity to someone whose circumstances have changed in ways that no one knows quite how to address. Kenny Rogers was not among the people who said little. He had known Dottie for years, not just as a professional partner, not just as a voice on the other side of a recording session, but as a person, with the kind of knowledge that accumulates between two people who have spent real time together in real circumstances. He knew what she had built. He knew what she had contributed to the music that both of them loved. He knew, in the specific way that old friends know these things, what it cost her to be in the position she was in. Not just financially, but in terms of dignity, in terms of the gap between who she had been in this industry and what she was being asked to accept. He reached out to her quietly, not publicly, not in the way that a public gesture of support would have required her to acknowledge her own difficulty in front of an audience, to accept help in a way that made the need for it visible. Privately, the way a real friend moves in these situations. He made it possible for her to continue in ways that would have been impossible otherwise. Not with the fanfare of a charity announcement, but with the specific, unannounced generosity of someone who understood that what his friend needed most was not attention, but simply the ability to go on. People who were close to Dottie West in this period described Kenny's role with the careful language that people use when they're protecting someone's dignity, even in retrospect, acknowledging that he was there, that he helped, without specifying the exact form that help took, in a way that might reduce her to a recipient of charity rather than a friend who received something from a friend. The distinction mattered to her, and Kenny understood that it mattered, which is why he kept it the way he did. The promise Kenny Rogers made to Dottie West was never stated as a promise. It was never announced, never made public, never formalized in language that could be quoted or cited. It was simply the ongoing choice of a person who had decided that a friend in difficulty was still a friend. That what a person had been mattered as much as what the industry currently thought they were, and that the right response to someone's hardest years was neither distance nor pity, but presence. He was present, not loudly, not in a way that drew attention to either his generosity or her need. Just present, in the particular way that matters most in the hardest years. Consistently, quietly, without requiring anything in return. For the people in Nashville who knew both of them, who had watched them record together, watched them perform together, watched the arc of a friendship that had been built in the margins of a shared industry, Kenny's behavior toward Dottie in her final years was the clearest illustration of something that his music spent decades trying to say. That the measure of a person isn't the size of their audience in any given year, and that the most important things a person does are almost never the things that end up on charts. Dottie West deserved more from the industry that had once celebrated her. What she got from Kenny Rogers was something the industry couldn't provide. A friend who showed up when it would have been easy not to. That's the part of the story that the duets never told. That's the part that matters.